Hello, everyone, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and today we are going to travel to the planet Eternia. We're going to go over the history of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, a toy line and cartoon that came out in the early 80s that just captivated the eyes and imagination of young gentlemen like myself around that time who was born at the perfect time to partake in this phenomenon that was Masters of the Universe. And I can't imagine my childhood without an He-Man action figure in my house. I mean, just like any other little adolescent boy around that time, had the action figures, played with them, fought against Skeletor and all of the other minions, and even doing crossovers, fighting against GI Joes and stuff like that. Your imagination was your playground back in the day. See, we didn't have. I'm sounding like an old timer now. We didn't have the iPhones and the iPads and 3,800 channels to to surf. We just had toys, man. We had actual toys that we could play with the toys and then turn on the TV and watch the cartoon and play alongside of the cartoon while it's going on in real time. It was a joy. It was a joy. I still have my He-Man action figure. And you may wonder, do I whip it out and play? No. I say I still have it because I know where it is. It's it's not with me here. It's at my parents' house. It's at my mom's house, buried in the backyard. He-Man lost a battle in one of my imaginary in one of my imaginary wars that was taking place, and I did a ceremonial funeral for He-Man. And now I always intended on going back and digging him up, but didn't happen. And eventually, my dad, God rest his soul, he gave me a basketball court one year for my birthday, and he poured the slab and everything so I can have a basketball court in my backyard. And I believe that He-Man is currently under that slab of concrete in my backyard, resting peacefully with some other toys. He-Man wasn't the only one that I laid to rest back there. It's pretty much pet cemetery for toys and action figures in my mom's backyard. But I fully intend on replenishing my collection. I just haven't had the time or the money because you can't just go to Toys R Us anymore. It doesn't exist and find a He-Man action figure. You're gonna have to go on eBay or wherever and buy these things, and they're not cheap. They're collector's items. So I dropped the ball there. I really dropped the ball there. I probably could have paid off a car or a house or something by now with all of the toys I had growing up, and either broke or did a realistic burial of these characters that I've. It was. Look, yes, I'm weird. I know I'm weird. It is what it is. At least I can admit it, doggone it. But that's besides the point. The point of all this is my 80s, my childhood was He-Man. When you think of watching Saturday morning cartoons or afternoon cartoons when you come home from school, the first cartoon that pops in my head is He-Man in the Masters of the Universe. That's all I remember. Well, not all, but it's like the number one cartoon of my childhood. You know, then you get the Thundercats and Silverhawks and all that other good stuff that was around that same era, and the plethora of cartoons. But I'm telling you, man, we had it good back then. We had it good, and we just didn't know it. Because you look now I'm searching for cartoons. I'm trying to recapture my childhood, and I can't find any good cartoons to watch. Anything that captures the imagination like it did back in the day. Now, all of those cartoons, pretty basic. There was nothing innovative. I mean, because it was targeted for kids. Let's be honest here. There wasn't any Orson Welles, a Citizen Kane of Saturday morning cartoons that was so deep and character driven that you was just in enamored by all of the storytelling going on. That wasn't the goal. The goal was just to keep kids occupied for 30 minutes at a time. And He-Man was definitely that. He-Man, it was silly. It was dumb at times, but it was so entertaining. When you go back and think about it and look at it now, it's a silly concept. And so that's one of the things that give me a little hesitation of this new adaptation of Masters of the Universe that's going to be released on June the 5th in theaters. This live action adaptation, to be exact. I'm excited for the nostalgia of it all, but I'm not looking for anything perfect out of that movie. I'm not looking for anything to make any sense, to be honest with you. I just want to be entertained for an hour and a half or 2 hours, however long the movie is going to be, because I will be there on June the 5th. And you can best believe that I will be trying to recapture my childhood with this film. With all that being said, let's go back to where it all started. What was the genesis of this character? In case you don't know, if you wasn't an old grizzled man like myself and wasn't around this time and don't know exactly how this character came to be. Well, is he based on a comic book? Is he a character that came from the mind of a studio head that just wanted to make a quick buck with a Saturday morning cartoon? Or did it come from a toy line? Well, if that was your guess, you was 100% correct. He-Man is a superhero of this franchise called Masters of the Universe, which includes a toy line, several animation TV series. Most recently, they had adaptation on Netflix and comic books as well. And as of June the 5th, 2 live action films. The one that's coming up on June 5th, and the other one is going to be our review at the end of our show, Masters of the Universe, which came out in 1987. Yes, 39 years ago. 39 years ago. I can't believe it was that long. Next year it'll be 40 years since Masters of the Universe that starred Dolph Lundgren as He-Man. You have Frank Langella as Skeletor. A movie that is so bad. When you hear people say movies that are so bad they're good, they're talking about Masters of the Universe from 1987. Horrible movie, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. But He-Man is categorized by his superhuman strength and his powerful sword, and just like any superhero, whether it's in comic books or any other media, he does have an alter ego, Prince Adam. And He-Man and his friends, they attempt to defend the secrets of Castle Grayskull on planet Eternia and the rest of the universe from the evil forces of his uncle and arch enemy Skeletor. Just a little bonus feature here. He-Man has a twin sister who later on had her own animated cartoon, She-Ra. And so the character was created by designer Mark Taylor, who based the character on his childhood drawings. One of those drawings was used by Mattel's designer, Roger Sweet, in his pitch to Mattel for a new action figure line. Now, to give you a little backstory with that, Mattel had just passed on the toy line for Star Wars. they didn't see any value in that. So they passed on it. So George Lucas took it to Kenner, the toy line, and they developed the toys for Star Wars, which generated like $4 billion. And Mattel was kicking themselves in the behind because of that decision. So they were scrambling, trying to find the next big thing to kind of compete now, because at this point they've been overtaken by Kenner. So after failure after failure after failure, they tried out this He-Man thing. This was back in 1976, and it was Roger Sweet who chose the name He-Man and suggested that it have a twist action wrist, something that was innovative at the time, as far as action figures and toys are concerned. And so Roger Sweet sculpted and presented 3 different versions of the figure to Mattel, including a soldier, a spaceman, and a barbarian. The barbarian version was chosen and developed into the character's current form that we know today. Afterwards, Roger Sweet was taken off of the project, and Mark Taylor came in to be the principal designer of the toy line. And so back then, when they released the toy line, they had a storyline to go with it too. It wasn't just a toy. Here you go, play with it. Even though most kids didn't care, you know. But for the ones that were actually going to play with it and create their own world, their own universe, their own little stories, they gave a little backstory for all of these characters. And that's when the TV show came into play. So they hired these writers for a TV show to go along with the toy lines. See, this was odd. At least it was for me when I found out this what it was, because initially I thought that the toys were based on the cartoon, but no, it's the opposite. The cartoon was based on the toys, and normally you would think like a movie or TV show or something like that, they release a toy line to go along with it to help with the promotion and the merchandising and all this other stuff. But no. No. They released the cartoon or produced this cartoon to sell toys. So this is where we get a lot of the backstory, the supporting characters, our villains, and all this. All this was devised by the cartoon, by the writers. And as they came up with these ideas for the show, then the toy makers would have to go and design the design the characters so it can go along with the TV show as well. And so that's how they worked hand in hand to create He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And it became an instant success, rapidly increasing the sales of the toys. And it was a huge success, especially in the 80s, gaining 9 million viewers in its first year in the United States alone, and began broadcasting to at least 37 countries as well. The massive success of that series led to a feature-length film in 1985, He-Man and She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword, from the same production team, and it shared continuity or spin-off series for She-Ra, Princess of Power. There was also a primetime hour-long Christmas special, He-Man and She-Ra, a Christmas special. I vaguely remember that I was like 6 or 7 when that came out. I remember that, but I don't remember anything about it. But I do remember them releasing a Christmas special. That was the thing back then. I think infamously everybody remembers the Star Wars holiday special, which was, my God. But yeah, man, the cartoon was awesome. I loved that cartoon. Jumping over to the comic book pages, He-Man and Masters of the Universe also graced our comic book pages, dating all the way back to 1981, when it first had its first mini comics, if you will, and that was released by Mattel. And it was the story of the characters. And in those early comics, it, Conan was a barbarian. He was just wandering like this dystopian world. Well, the planet of Eternia, but it was dystopian looking, and he was just wandering around. And the world was dealing with the aftermath of a war, but the results of the war, you had leftover machinery and weapons that were used, in this dystopian world. And the war opened a rift between dimensions, which allowed Skeletor to travel to Eternia. And Skeletor has set his sights on Castle Grayskull, the fortress of mystery and power. And whoever controls Grayskull will control the masters of the universe. That's always been the story when it came to this particular property. But to prevent Skeletor from achieving his goal, He-Man has received special powers and weapons from the sorceress and defends the castle from Skeletor. So that was basically the official, unofficial origin of He-Man and his special abilities, because he has superhuman strength. He's a superhero, and he has that power sword. So he is a bona fide comic book superhero. And so we fast forward to a couple of years after that, and DC Comics stuck their hands into the Masters of the Universe cookie jar. They debuted a comic back in July of 1982, and the series crossed over into the DC universe in a story that had He-Man teaming with Superman. And from there, I think the next year, they debuted Masters of the Universe limited series in DC Comics, and that ran for 3 issues. And so you had a nice little run in DC when it came to Masters of the Universe. And this was all running concurrent with the TV show and the toy line. So all of this was, I guess you consider, canon in this universe. I never read the comics. I didn't read the Master. I didn't think it was. I didn't think it was a legit thing. To be honest with you, because you normally around that time you always get comic book uh, adaptations of a TV show or a movie that was just like one-offs and stuff like that. So I never really paid much attention to them unless they had serious runs in the comics. But I didn't really dive into the Masters of the Universe comic book. But the DC Comics run didn't last long. In 1983, they kind of went back to Mattel. Mattel was releasing these mini comics throughout the 80s, all the way up to 1986. And in 1986, Marvel decided to give it a shot. But not Marvel proper. It was one of their subsidies, Star Comics. They made a 13-issue run of Masters of the Universe, but not really. Just like I was mentioning earlier, how they have these one-offs in the comic books when a movie or TV show come along. Well, that's basically what this comic was, to go in line with Masters of the Universe, the movie that came out in 1987. And this was the story or the backstory. It was a 13-issue run for this version, I guess you could say, of Masters of the Universe, because if you've seen that movie, like I said, we'll go over it. But if it's not a true adaptation of this property. But it went on to be in comic strips in the newspapers throughout the rest of the 80s, all the way up to the 90s, where it kind of pumped the brakes once it got to 91, kind of reemerged in the early 2000s with Image Comics. They gave it a shot. It bounced back to DC under Dark Horse Comics, and 2011, I believe, and it had a nice little run for about 4 years there, and went back to DC proper, where it was a part of the official DC universe. And this ran from 2012 to 2020, even having Masters of the Universe involved in the Injustice storyline in DC Comics. You know, that 6-part crossover series there. Very, they held it up, man. I remember reading the issue with He-Man in it. I was like, wait, what? I was lost at that point. But currently is still holding strong in Dark Horse Comics, and it is presently still a part of that canon over there. That's where Masters of the Universe Revelations and Revolution, which is the animated show that was on Netflix, that's what that show is based on, because the comics in the Dark Horse comics, I should say, is the prequel to that show. And so here are the list of all of the TV shows that He-Man and the Masters of the Universe are affiliated with, going all the way back to the premiere of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe in 1983. This graced the small screen for the majority of my come-uppins when I was a youngster. In 1985, you had He-Man and She-Ra, a Christmas special. In 1990, The New Adventures of He-Man. In 2002, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Now, let me pause for a second right there. That was a really good show. That was one of the best adaptations of He-Man that I can recall. It was so realistic and, well, I say realistic, but grounded and raw, and it was adult. You know, it really, I guess that show felt like, okay, the little kids that watched in 1983, they're grown up now, and so He-Man needs to grow up with them, and that's what the 2002 version felt like. It was so good, so good. Didn't last long. I was kind of upset by that. It didn't last long at all. But it was so good. From 2021 to 2024, you had Masters of the Universe, Revelation, and Revolution, and in 2021, you had the CGI reboot, Masters of the Universe. As far as films are concerned, you have He-Man and She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword. That was the 1985 animated film. And the 1987 live action Masters of the Universe. Chippendale Rescue Rangers in 2022. There was a cameo. If you remember that movie was so underrated. I think that is the most slept on movie ever. Chippendale Rescue Rangers was awesome. I love that movie. But He-Man and Skeletor make cameos in that movie. And then we're getting our reboot of Masters of the Universe in just a few days. But before we run out to the theater to catch that one, let's circle back to 1987 and let's review Masters of the Universe. Directed by Gary Goddard, it stars Dolph Lundgren as He-Man, Franklin Jeller as Skeletor. You have a young Courtney Cox in this film. This film had a $22 million budget, and that's 1987 money, and it only mustered up 17 million. But out of that 17 million, $10 of it was me and my dad. I begged my dad to bring me to go see this movie. It was nothing I wanted more in life at the time than to go see Masters of the Universe. I couldn't wait for this movie. I remember seeing the trailer for this movie, and my little 6-year-old mind just blew out of the skull. I was like, what? It's going to be live action. It's going to be real. It's going to be actual human beings playing He-Man. I'm like, who can play He-Man? And this is fresh off of watching Rocky 4, and seeing this big Russian who we find out later is actually Swedish, but you see this big old Russian towering over Sylvester Stallone. And Sylvester Stallone, around that era, he was Rambo, he was Rocky. I mean, he was a man's man. This big old muscular guy, and to see him look like a little kid next to this guy in that movie was like phenomenal. Like, where did they find this guy? Wait, he's gonna play He-Man? Oh yes, perfect, perfect. But I'm 6 years old. I wasn't a cinephile back then. I didn't consider the fact that Dolph Lundgren at the time couldn't act. He couldn't act, but it barely spoke English. From what we find out later on, his lines had to be fed to him, and so that's me now talking. Back then in 1986, 87, I didn't care. And so we go we go forward. I get to see Skeletor in live action. I get to see Eternia in live action. I get to see a man in at arms. You get Orko. I get to see all of these characters. Well, not so fast. Not so fast. Canon, the Canon Group is the studio behind Masters of the Universe. And if you don't know anything about the Canon Group, they're very, very predominant movie studio of the 80s that gave you these low budget action movies around that time that just looked bad. It was just the most cheap looking action movies you're ever going to see, but they're so fun to watch. But they didn't have money like that, and it was even worse because Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, and you may wonder what that got to do with Masters of the Universe live action film. Well, Canon released that movie, and they put all their eggs in the Superman basket. It's because it's Superman. It was a smart move. They got the rights, released the film, and it was horrible. Box office disaster. Bankrupt the studio. The unfortunate part for Masters of the Universe, this all happened in the middle of production. And so all of the plans they had initially, this movie wasn't going to take place on Earth. This movie was going to take place on Eternia, because that's what the story is. That's what He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is. It has nothing to do with Earth. And so the studio head said, okay, I know how we can save money. Let's set it on Earth. Let's find a way to set it on Earth. And so that's what they did. And that's how we get this movie, this monstrosity of a film. And I must say, at the age of 1987, I was 8. And at the age of 8, I realized at that point, I knew the difference between a bad film and a good film. And this was the bad one. I sat there and I realized for the first time in my life, in 8 long years on Earth, this is the first time I'm sitting in a movie theater mad. Did not enjoy it. I've seen bad movies up to that point, but I didn't get mad, or I didn't realize they were bad until later, because I was just happy to be in a movie theater. I love movie theaters. I love going and watch movies. Did not love this because the movie was so bad. I can live with the fact that they changed it up. Okay, I know that there's going to be a deviation from the source material. We get that today. Whether you transferring it from a comic book or a TV show or a toy line, it doesn't matter. Whenever you transfer one media to another, there's going to be changes. So I get that. I can live with that, but I couldn't live with this. First and foremost, this movie is set on Earth. I don't understand why it had to be set on Earth. I don't understand why Earth played a major part in Eternia and Castle Grayskull. Made no sense. Then you have no Oracle. Now it's 1987. This is pre CGI, AI, whatever. You didn't have that luxury. And so you had to cut back on some things. But to give you another character that made no sense, that was never introduced in any other iteration of Masters of the Universe, and make him a central part of the story. I think his name was Gwandor or whatever. Horrible character, ugly as well. And then this cosmic key thing that opens up these rifts in the dimension to whereas you can travel to Earth and Eternia and this, that, and the third, whatever. But that was the MacGuffin of the movie. But the most offensive thing about this movie that I recognized in 1987, sitting in that movie theater, that got me so mad was the fact that we're focusing on Courtney Cox's character and her boyfriend. I could care less about her story. I came here to watch He-Man say, I have the power, and kick Skeletor's butt. That's the only reason I'm here. But for some strange reason, they felt they had to give this movie some gravitas to connect with the teenage audience, because that's what 80s films did. Around this time, you got The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, St. Elmo's Fire, and all these, with the Brat Pack movies. All that was coming out, so they figured, hey, teenage movies are getting over. Let's try putting the teenage story in this one. Why? Why? It made no sense. Courtney Cox's character's parents died in a car crash, right? And so this was her arc throughout the movie. She's dealing with grief throughout this film, and she stumbles upon the key, the cosmic key, and He-Man is tracking it down, as well as Skeletor, sending his minions after her, and all this other stuff. All right, whatever. But they were the central focus of the film. Now, there's a lot of reasons why that could have happened. Reason number one, the aforementioned Dolph Lundgren can't act at this point. He can act now. I've been seeing him in movies, seen him in multiple films where he was killing it on screen. He just didn't find his stride. This is his second film, so he didn't, and he's starring. So there's a lot of pressure on him. And so you have that going for you. So they were trying to hide him. That's why you didn't get a lot of He-Man. All right. Reason number two, due to the fact they couldn't create an Eternia, they had to kind of draw your attention away from that. So we followed these two characters through the entire film. Or reason number three, they really didn't have a story and they were just flying by the seat of their pants. I go with reason number four, all of the above. It's just a dumpster fire of a movie. The performances here, look, everybody was trying. I rewatched it the other day. I can honestly say they were trying. They had nothing to work with. It was nothing they could do to make this movie better, acting wise, their performance wise. What was on the page was complete garbage. And they tried. Every actor in here, even Dolph Lundgren at this time, they tried. But you know who tried the hardest? And you know who I love even to this day? Is Frank Langella as Skeletor. He is the only one out of this entire cast that knew exactly what movie he was in. He chewed up every second of scene that he was in. He act a plumb fool as Skeletor. I loved him in this movie. The only redeeming quality of this movie is watching Frank Langella's performance. Over the top doesn't do it justice. That's not an apt description of his performance. He went all in. And I can't, man, you can't do nothing but tip your hat to Frank Langella as Skeletor in this movie. He went all in. He didn't care. He was like, you know what? I'm here. Y'all paying me. Let me go with it. And he went with it. Loved his performance. Really did. The action was not all that good. Dolph Lundgren swinging a sword didn't look good. You know, it didn't look fluid. Nobody looked like they were trained at any point for these action sequences. The visual effects was horrible, but you got to kind of give a little learning curve there because it was 1987. You know, it wasn't Matrix level special effects. They had a couple of good shots in there, like when Skeletor arrived on Earth. I thought that was a pretty cool scene. But the rest of the visual effects was not looking good. One in particular, the final fight between He-Man and Skeletor. Speaking of He-Man, let me get to that. Speaking of He-Man, the fact that he was never Prince Adam in this movie. Never. He was He-Man the entire movie. But anyways, going back to that final fight with him and Skeletor, it was dark. It looked bad. And that's kind of excused when you learn the backstory. The sets were being torn down as they shot. That's how much they were in financial peril during the production of this movie. They'll shoot scenes in a certain set and they'll move on to the next scene and they'll tear down the set so they can kind of hurry up and rebuild another one for another movie to try to pull them out of this financial bind that they're in. And so when you got to that final fight, they had to be in a set. You know, it was set in a spot that they already filmed in, and there was no set. And so that's why it's dark. They're basically fighting in a warehouse with nothing around them, just with the, clever lighting and all this other stuff. That's why it looks the way it looks. And I just feel bad for the filmmakers and everything because they were so handcuffed in this movie. I feel bad for them because they probably had a good movie that they wanted to produce, but they couldn't financially. Another thing I liked the scene when He-Man got the Sword of Power back, I should say, when he pulled it out of this little locking mechanism that Skeletor put it in, and he finally said the line, "I have the power." And that was cool because I liked the way it just looked, cinematically, it looked great. And that was your crowd pleasing moment when he pulled it out of there, like King Arthur pulling the sword out of the stone, if you will. It was awesome. That was awesome. If the rest of the movie was like that, we'll be singing a different tune. And so with that, Frank Langella's performance and everybody really giving it their all. They really gave it their all. I can't knock the movie. I would consider it a cult film right now. You know, it's one of those guilty pleasures. This is the sheer definition of a movie that was so bad that it's good. You can watch this and laugh, you know. And that's the type of movie this is. You can watch it and laugh, especially at the end. Because we get to the end of this movie, and like I said, Courtney Cox's character, her parents died in a car crash. Now, this was long before He-Man and Man-at-Arms and everybody came to Earth. The Cosmic Key, they they went back to Eternia, or sent them back, because they all had went back to Eternia. That's where the final battle happened in Castle Grayskull. And so they go back home. And when she gets back home, she wakes up out the bed, goes downstairs, and her parents were there. I couldn't take it, bro. I couldn't. I was so mad. 8 years old, walking out the theater. Man, I remember my dad asking me, "Hey, did you like it?" He's still waiting on his answer today, and God rest his soul, he's passed away, and he'll never get that answer because I didn't have an answer for him. I couldn't answer him. I don't know what I watched. I still don't know. And I watched it the other day. I still don't know what I watched. They should have just left it alone. Once every sign told them to leave it alone, but they kept going. They tried their best to make chicken salad out of chicken you know what, and it still was chicken you know what. And then had the audacity, and I didn't notice at the time because this is pre-MCU, stay to the end of the credits and all that there. So I didn't know anything about a post-credit scene and all this here. I found out years later. I think I was a teenager or something like that. Masters of the Universe was on HBO or something. And I tried watching it again, got disgusted, left out the room. I came back, and the credits were about to end, and all of a sudden Skeletor head popped up out the water and said, "I'll be back." I'm like, wait, what? Wait, they just add that? Or that was there the whole time? I did not know it had a post-credit scene. After all those years, did not know it. And they had the audacity to set up a sequel to this crap. Thankfully, it didn't come to fruition. Masters of the Universe from 1987 gets a letter grade of a D-. Yeah, only a couple of redeeming qualities about this movie. It's a true guilty pleasure. It's one of those movies you watch just to say I watched it. Yeah, I watched that. That's it. It's no icebreaker here. There's nothing that's going to engage a conversation. The only conversation you will have with others, oh, did you see Masters of the Universe from 1987? Yeah, that movie sucked. Yeah, I feel the same way. That's the end of the conversation. There's nothing else to say about Masters of the Universe from 1987. Hopefully, this one will be better. Hopefully, this reboot that's coming out at the beginning of June will be better. As long as it's better than this, I'm good. I feel like I got my money's worth. And judging by the trailer, it looks like it's leaning into the camp. It's leaning into the real origins of the character. We're going to get a real adaptation of Masters of the Universe, He-Man and Prince Adam and Skeletor and all this other good stuff. It looks like we're getting what we hoped we had gotten in 1987, but we shall see. I would like to know, did you own any action figures from Masters of the Universe, or did you collect them? Did you break them? Did you bury them in the backyard after a long, exhausting battle with Skeletor? I would like to know that. I like to know, did you watch the 1987 Masters of the Universe film with Dolph Lundgren as He-Man, and what were your thoughts on it? It sucked. Okay, yeah, that's all we could talk about. Anywho's, I want to know your thoughts. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, don't forget about YouTube. Subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me as we went over the history of He-Man, Masters of the Universe. Want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.